The millionaire's son mocked the new intern's humble clothes in front of the entire company. Amarello. A minute later, he collapsed when his father revealed who the intern really was. The Thompson Technologies headquarters towered over downtown Boston, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. Inside, on the 45th floor, William Will Thompson III stood by his office window, adjusting his $5,000 custom-made suit with a smirk on his face. "Mr. Thompson, I can explain the delay in the report." James Parker, a senior developer with 20 years of experience, stood nervously before Will's desk. "Save it," Will interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. "Do you know how much your incompetence costs this company every minute?" He walked around his desk, making sure everyone in the open office could hear him. "Or maybe you're too busy planning your retirement to care about actual work?" James's face reddened as younger employees pretended not to watch. "I've dedicated my life to this company, Mr. Thompson. The delay was due to your obsolescence," Will cut in again, louder this time. "Maybe it's time we replaced you with someone who actually understands modern technology. Someone who wasn't coding when computers still used floppy disks." Tears welled up in James's eyes, but Will didn't stop. "Clear out your desk. HR will contact you about your termination package." He turned to his assistant. "Make sure security escorts him out. We can't risk him sabotaging anything on his way out." As James was led away, Will's father, William Thompson Jr., appeared in the doorway. "Son, board meeting in 5 minutes. We have some exciting news." In the boardroom, William Sr. stood at the head of the table, beaming with pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Thompson Tech has been a family business for 3 generations. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Will is being promoted to Executive Vice President of Operations." The board members applauded politely, though some exchanged worried glances. They'd all witnessed Will's behavior over the years. "Will has been groomed for this position since birth," his father continued. "He understands our values, our vision." Will's mind drifted to his childhood. After his mother's death when he was 10, his father had compensated with endless gifts and privileges. The best schools, the finest clothes, the most expensive cars, nothing was too good for the Thompson heir. Later that afternoon, in the employee break room, 2 workers whispered while watching a video on their phone. It showed Will's earlier confrontation with James, secretly recorded by another employee. "That's the 5th person he's fired this month," one whispered. "And now he's getting promoted?" the other replied. "This company's going downhill fast." "Did you save the video?" "Yeah, adding it to the folder. Someone needs to expose him eventually." They quickly dispersed as Will walked past, not even acknowledging their existence. In his mind, they were just replaceable cogs in his family's empire. Back in his office, Will reviewed the quarterly reports. Numbers were down, innovation was stagnating, but he didn't care. Soon he'd have even more power, more control. The Thompson legacy would continue through him, exactly as his father wanted. His assistant knocked timidly. "Mr. Thompson, HR needs your signature on James Parker's termination papers." Will signed with a flourish, not bothering to read the details. Make sure his project is reassigned to someone competent this time. As the sun set over Boston, Will gathered his things, satisfied with another day of asserting his dominance. Little did he know, his world was about to be turned upside down by someone he would never see coming. In the parking garage, he climbed into his Ferrari, not noticing the cleaning staff watching him leave. Among them, an older woman shook her head. "Pride comes before the fall," she muttered in Spanish, having witnessed countless displays of Will's cruelty. The engine roared as Will sped away, leaving behind a wake of resentment and fear that had been building for years. The Thompson empire stood strong, but its foundation was beginning to crack, one mistreated employee at a time. Sarah Miller stood before her parents' graves, holding fresh flowers. The morning dew still clung to the grass at Pine Grove Cemetery. 1 year had passed since the accident that took them both. "I miss you," she whispered, placing the flowers between their headstones. Her father, Robert Miller, had been a tech industry giant, though few knew what he really looked like. He'd avoided publicity, focusing instead on innovation and treating people right. Sarah touched her father's headstone, remembering their last conversation. "Start from the bottom," he had told her. That's how you truly learn the value of work and respect. At the time, she hadn't understood. Now his words guided every decision she made. A memory washed over her. She was sitting in her father's study just weeks before the accident. "Money doesn't define character, Sarah," Robert had said, looking up from his laptop. "I started with nothing, worked as a janitor while coding at night. Never forget where you come from." "But Dad, we're billionaires now," teenage Sarah had replied. "Why do you still drive that old car?" "Because it works just fine," he'd smiled. "Humility kept me grounded when success could have changed me. Promise me you'll remember that." Back in the present, Sarah wiped away a tear. Her father's empire, the Miller Technology Corporation, was now legally hers, but she had other plans first. From the cemetery hill, she could see the Thompson Technologies building dominating the skyline. Her father and William Thompson Sr. had history, a complex past few people knew about. Later that morning, Sarah walked into Thompson Tech's lobby wearing simple, clean clothes from a department store. Nothing designer, nothing flashy. Her resume listed her computer science degree, but omitted her last name's significance. "Sarah Miller for the internship interview," she told the receptionist. In the HR office, Sarah kept her answers humble, but showed her expertise. The interviewer was impressed, but it was Mr. Edwards, the company's longtime legal counsel, who really caught her attention. He studied her carefully, something flickering in his eyes. Sarah tensed. Did he recognize her? He had been her father's lawyer too, years ago. "There's something familiar about you, Miss Miller," Edwards said slowly. Sarah maintained her composure. "I get that sometimes. Just one of those faces, I guess." Edwards nodded, but she could tell he wasn't convinced. Her hand instinctively went to her necklace, a simple silver chain her father had given her. Walking through the office for her department tour, Sarah overhead raised voices. Will Thompson was berating another employee. She watched him, noting how everyone else cringed away. "And this will be your desk," the HR representative said, gesturing to a workspace. "Mr. Thompson's office is right over there. He'll be overseeing some of your projects." Will noticed them and walked over, looking Sarah up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Another intern?" he asked, not bothering to introduce himself. "Try not to waste too much of our time." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'll do my best, Mr. Thompson." He smirked and walked away. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering her father's words about humility and purpose. She had a job to do, and Will Thompson's arrogance wouldn't stop her. That evening, in her modest one-bedroom apartment, Sarah looked at her parents, that photo, the secret weight of her inheritance pressed down on her. Somewhere in her closet, stock certificates worth billions sat in an old shoebox, waiting for the right moment. "I'll make you proud, Dad," she whispered. "I'll learn everything from the ground up, just like you did." Her phone buzzed, a message confirming her internship acceptance. Sarah looked out her window at the city lights. Tomorrow would be her first real day at Thompson Tech, and the real test would begin. Will Thompson stormed into his office, his face red with anger. The quarterly report he'd submitted had been returned with corrections, all made by the new intern, Sarah Miller. "Who does she think she is?" he snapped at his assistant. "Get her in here." "Now." Sarah entered moments later, calm and composed. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Thompson?" Will held up the report. "You marked corrections on my work?" "I was asked to review the quarterly numbers," Sarah replied. "There were some calculation errors that could have cost the company millions." "Impossible. I checked everything myself." "Check page 47. The algorithm for projecting market expansion is flawed. I rewrote it to include current market variables." Will scrolled through the document on his computer. His jaw clenched as he realized she was right. The error would have been disastrous if not caught. "Get out," he muttered. As Sarah left, he slammed his fist on the desk. In the break room, employees whispered about the incident. "Did you hear? The new intern saved us from a huge mistake." Will must be furious. Nobody's ever corrected him before. That afternoon, Will implemented his plan. He accessed Sarah's computer remotely, intending to corrupt her files before a major presentation. But when he tried to sabotage her work, he found her security protocols impenetrable. Meanwhile, in the company archives, Mr. Edwards pulled out an old file. Inside was a photograph of William Thompson Sr. and Robert Miller signing a contract 20 years ago. He studied it carefully. then looked through his office window at Sarah working at her desk. The next day, Sarah's innovative solutions caught the attention of senior management. Will watched in growing frustration as she gained more recognition. "She's incredible," one manager said. "Best intern we've ever had." Will started digging into her background. Something about her didn't add up. Her college records were perfect, but information before that was surprisingly sparse. In his father's office, William Sr. reviewed old documents. A memory surfaced, Robert Miller's voice echoing from the past. "One day, William, our companies will be united, but not the way you expect." Back at her desk, Sarah noticed unauthorized attempts to access her files. She smiled slightly, recognizing Will's digital fingerprints. Her father had taught her cybersecurity since she was 12. The tension reached a breaking point during a department meeting. Sarah presented a new efficiency protocol that would save the company substantial money. "This is brilliant," the department head praised. "Will, you could learn something from Sarah's approach." Will's face darkened. After the meeting, he cornered Sarah in the corridor. "Listen carefully," he hissed. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this is my company. You're just temporary help." Sarah met his gaze. "I'm just here to work, Mr. Thompson. Nothing more." That evening, Will stayed late, searching for anything he could use against Sarah. His investigation led him to an old news article about Robert Miller's death. Something caught his eye, a blurry photo of Miller's funeral. In the background, partially obscured, stood a young woman who looked familiar. Before he could look closer, his father entered. "Working late, son?" Will quickly closed the browser. "Just research." Speaking of research, William Sr. said, "The board is impressed with Sarah's work. They're considering offering her a permanent position." Will's hands clenched into fists. "She's hiding something. I know it." "Maybe you should focus more on your own work," his father suggested, leaving Will alone with his growing paranoia. In her apartment, Sarah received a secure email from Mr. Edwards. "We need to talk. Privately." She stared at the message, wondering if her cover was about to be blown. Everything hinged on timing. She couldn't let her true identity be revealed too soon. The pieces were moving on the board, and the game was becoming more dangerous by the day. Will sat in his office at midnight, forging documents. The computer screen illuminated his face as he altered financial reports, carefully planting evidence that would implicate Sarah in data theft. "Let's see how smart you are when you're facing criminal charges," he muttered. A noise startled him. Sarah was still at her desk, reviewing company accounts. Will quickly closed his files, watching her through the glass partition. She was exactly where he needed her, about to discover the trail he'd created. Sarah frowned at her screen. The numbers didn't add up. She'd found several suspicious transactions, all leading to offshore accounts. But something felt wrong about the pattern. "Still here?" Will approached her desk, feigning concern. "These reports show irregularities," Sarah replied. "Someone's been manipulating the data." "Really? You should report that immediately." Will smiled. His trap was set. In his office, Mr. Edwards watched the interaction. He'd been monitoring Will's activities, knowing the young Thompson's desperation would lead to mistakes. The next morning, a crisis erupted. The company's main project was failing, and the client threatened to pull out. William Sr. called an emergency meeting. "We're losing millions," he announced. "I need our best people on this. Will, Sarah, you'll work together to fix this." "Father, I don't need. This isn't a request, Will. That Sarah's expertise could save this project." Forced to collaborate, Will and Sarah sat in the conference room, tension thick between them. "Stay out of my way," Will warned. "I'll handle this." Sarah ignored his threat, focusing on the project details. "The core problem is in the system architecture. We need to rebuild it. And I suppose you know how?" "Actually, yes." Sarah pulled up a diagram. "See these connection points? They're vulnerable to failure." Will stared at her work. Recognizing solutions he'd never considered, his anger grew. Who was this intern who seemed to know everything? Late that night, Sarah discovered more than Will intended. Behind the fake trail he'd created, she found evidence of actual financial misconduct, not by her but at the executive level. Mr. Edwards appeared at her desk. "Be careful, Miss Miller. Some truths are dangerous here." "You know, don't you, about who I am?" He nodded slowly. "Your father was a good man, and a better friend than the Thompsons deserved." Sarah glanced at Will's office. Does he know? No, but he's getting suspicious. Watch your back. The project crisis worsened. Will's attempts to solve it alone led to more failures. The client set a deadline: fix it in 48 hours or lose the contract. Will found Sarah in the break room. This is your fault. Everything was fine before you came. Was it? Sarah challenged. Or were you just better at hiding the problems? You think you're so perfect. Let's see what happens when they discover your fake credentials. Sarah stepped closer. Is that what you've been doing? Planting evidence? You should check your digital footprints more carefully. Will's face paled. She'd known about his plan all along. That evening, Sarah worked late again, systematically backing up evidence of Will's schemes. A shadow fell across her desk. You should go home, Mr. Edwards advised. The night guard informed me Will's coming back. Just 5 more minutes. I need to secure these files. Sarah, your father wouldn't want you taking unnecessary risks. She thought of her dad, always cautious, always 3 steps ahead. Sometimes risks are necessary for justice. As she finally left, Will watched from his car in the parking garage. He pulled out his phone and dialed. It's me. I need that information on Sarah Miller tonight, whatever it costs. Something's not right about her, and I'm going to find out what. The pieces of his plan were falling into place. Soon, he thought, the mysterious intern would be exposed and eliminated. But in his obsession with destroying Sarah, Will didn't notice the bigger trap he was walking into. One that had been set long before he even knew her name. Sarah stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The financial records revealed a pattern of corruption going back years, and William Thompson Sr.'s signature was all over it. Looking at something interesting? Will's voice made her jump. She quickly minimized the window. Just reviewing project files, she replied. Will lingered suspiciously. At 3 in the morning? Could ask you the same thing. He leaned against her desk. This is my company. I can be here whenever I want. After Will left, Sarah pulled the files back up. Millions had been diverted through shell companies. The transactions were clever, but she recognized the pattern, similar to schemes her father had investigated before his death. Down the hall, Will passed his father's office and heard voices. She's getting too close, William. Mr. Edwards' voice was tense. If she finds those records. She won't, William Sr. replied. The evidence was buried years ago. Robert's daughter isn't stupid. She's exactly like him. Will froze. Robert's daughter? Who are they talking about? Keep her occupied, William Sr. ordered. This company can't afford a scandal right now. Will ducked into a side room as Edwards left. His mind raced. What evidence? What scandal? And who was Robert? The next morning, a group of employees gathered at Sarah's desk. The changes you suggested saved the entire project, one said. We're finally meeting deadlines. Will's gonna hate this, another whispered. He's been trying to get rid of you since day one. Sarah tensed as she noticed several employees recording their conversation. The gathering felt staged. Back to work, Will shouted, dispersing the group. He glared at Sarah. You're turning my own employees against me. They're just grateful for help, Sarah replied. Help? Will laughed coldly. You've been here 5 minutes. This company thrived for decades without you. Sarah almost revealed everything then, how the company was actually failing, how his father's corruption was bleeding it dry. But she remembered her own father's words about patience. Later in the server room, Sarah nearly collided with Mr. Edwards. Your father suspected, he said quietly, about the financial fraud. That's why he made the agreement. What agreement? Edwards glanced around. Not here. Too many ears. Sarah returned to her desk, fighting tears. She'd found proof her father had known about the Thompsons' corruption. Had that knowledge led to his death? Will watched security footage of Sarah and Edwards talking. Something about their interactions seemed rehearsed, planned. He dialed his investigator. I need everything on Robert Miller, he ordered. Especially anything connecting him to my father. That evening, Sarah considered quitting. The weight of secrets, lies, and corruption felt overwhelming. She opened her father's old journal. Sometimes the hardest path is the right one, he had written. Stay strong, stay focused, and remember why you started. A message popped up on her computer. More proof of William Sr.'s fraud. One file showed a familiar date, the day before her parents' accident. In his office, Will finally made the connection. He found an old article about Robert Miller's death with a photo of his teenage daughter at the funeral. The girl's face matched Sarah's. "Impossible," he whispered. Will rushed to his father's office. "Who was Robert Miller?" William Sr. paled. "Where did you hear that name? Was he the Robert you and Edwards were discussing? What evidence were you talking about?" "Drop it, Will. Some questions are better left unanswered." But Will couldn't drop it. Everything, Sarah's appearance, her knowledge, Edwards's behavior, suddenly made sense. Sarah was Robert Miller's daughter. She was here for a reason, and that reason terrified him. In the parking lot, Sarah received a text from Edwards. "He knows. Be careful." She looked up at the Thompson Tech building, its windows glowing in the night. Tomorrow would change everything. The truth was about to explode, and no one could predict who would survive the blast. The conference room buzzed with anticipation. Sarah was scheduled to present her findings on the company's systemic problems. Will arrived early, his laptop loaded with corrupted files he'd prepared to sabotage her presentation. "Ready for your big moment?" Will smirked as Sarah set up her equipment. "More than ready," she replied, not looking up. The room filled with board members and executives. William Sr. sat at the head of the table, looking unusually tense. Sarah began her presentation. "I've identified critical issues in our infrastructure." Will pressed a key on his laptop, initiating his sabotage program. Sarah's screen flickered but didn't fail. "As you can see," she continued, "our current system architecture is vulnerable." Will pressed another key, harder this time. Nothing happened. "Furthermore," Sarah said, pulling up detailed analytics, "our efficiency has dropped 40% in the last quarter." "That's impossible," Will interrupted. "Our reports show growth." "False reports," Sarah replied calmly. "I have proof of data manipulation." The room went silent. William Sr. shifted in his chair. "These accusations are serious," he said. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Why?" Will stood up. "Let's discuss it now. This intern comes in, spends a few weeks here, and suddenly she's an expert on our company?" "Actually," Sarah responded, "I think you know exactly who I am, Will." The room's atmosphere changed. Board members exchanged glances. Will launched into his attack. "Sarah Miller is a fraud. Her credentials are fake. She's been accessing restricted files and planting false information." He projected documents onto the screen, the evidence he'd fabricated. "These server logs show unauthorized access from her computer. She's trying to sabotage us from within." Sarah remained calm. "Those logs are forged, just like the financial reports your father's been submitting for years." Gasps filled the room. William Sr. stood up. "That's enough." "No," Sarah replied. "It's not nearly enough." The stress of the moment overwhelmed her. Images of her father flooded her mind. His integrity, his warnings about the Thompsons, his mysterious death. "I quit," she announced suddenly. Will's triumphant smile lasted only seconds. "You can't quit," Mr. Edwards spoke up. "You own the company." The room exploded in confusion. William Sr. sank back into his chair. "What are you talking about?" Will demanded. But Sarah was already walking out, tears streaming down her face. In the elevator, she remembered her father's words. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to gain what matters." She drove to the cemetery, sitting by her parents' graves as rain began to fall. "I couldn't do it, Dad," she whispered. "I couldn't stay strong." Back at Thompson Tech, chaos erupted. The board demanded explanations. Will frantically searched for information about Robert Miller and his company. Mr. Edwards found Sarah at the cemetery. "Your father knew this day would come," he said, holding an umbrella over her. "He prepared for it. Everything that's happening, it's all part of his plan." "His plan got him killed," Sarah replied bitterly. "No, Sarah. His plan was to protect you and to save Thompson Tech from itself." Sarah stood up, rain soaking her clothes. "I'm not coming back." "You have to. There's more at stake than you know. Your father and William Thompson Sr. weren't just business rivals. They were best friends once. What happened between them? It's why you're here now." Sarah stared at her father's grave, remembering his final words about purpose and perseverance. "The company needs you," Edwards continued. "The employees need you. Don't let Will's cruelty destroy what your father worked for." Thunder rolled overhead as Sarah made her decision. She'd come too far to give up now. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll come back tomorrow." As she drove home, Will sat in his dark office, finally understanding the truth. Sarah Miller wasn't just an intern, she was his worst nightmare come true. The Thompson Tech boardroom was packed. Every executive, board member, and senior manager had been summoned for an emergency meeting. Tension filled the air as Sarah walked in, no longer dressed like an intern, but in professional attire. Will stood at the front, prepared to destroy her once and for all. Before we begin, I have evidence of corporate espionage. Sit down, Will, Mr. Edwards commanded, taking control of the room. There's something everyone needs to know. Will refused to move. This woman is a spy. She infiltrated our company. She owns it, Edwards interrupted, pulling out a document. According to this agreement signed 20 years ago by Robert Miller and William Thompson Sr. The room erupted in chaos. William Sr. buried his face in his hands. That's impossible, Will shouted. This is a family company. Edwards projected the agreement onto the screen. Robert Miller provided the initial funding to save Thompson Tech from bankruptcy. In return, he received majority ownership to be inherited by his heir. Sarah Miller, someone whispered. Or should we say Sarah Miller Thompson, Edwards continued. Your fathers were more than business partners. They were brothers. The revelation hit Will like a physical blow. He staggered back. That's right. William Sr. finally spoke. Robert was my half-brother. We shared a father but different mothers. The company should have been his, but our father chose me. Sarah stood up. My father never wanted revenge. He wanted justice. You're lying, Will sputtered. All of you. The DNA tests are in this folder, Edward said. Along with proof of your attempts to sabotage Sarah, Will. The fake evidence, the forged documents, everything. Will turn to his father. You knew all this time? I knew Sarah was coming, William Sr. admitted. Robert told me before he died. That's why he structured the ownership agreement the way he did. Sarah walked to the front of the room. My father believed in this company. He believed in its potential, but he saw it being destroyed by greed and corruption. She displayed financial records on the screen. These show years of fraud, embezzlement, and cover-ups, millions stolen from employees' pension funds, projects sabotaged for insurance payouts. The board members looked horrified. Will saw his empire crumbling. You can't prove any of this, he threatened. Actually, she can, Edwards said. Robert Miller documented everything. He wanted to protect the company from exactly this kind of behavior. Sarah faced the room. I didn't come here for revenge. I came to honor my father's wishes, to restore this company's integrity. By destroying my family? Will demanded. Your family destroyed itself, Sarah replied. My father gave you chances to change. Every time you chose greed over ethics. William Sr. stood up. She's right, Will. We lost our way. Robert tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. The board needs to vote, Edwards announced. Based on these revelations, we need new leadership. This is ridiculous, Will shouted. I am a Thompson. This is my birthright. No, Sarah said quietly. It's your responsibility, one you never deserved. The vote was unanimous. Will was removed from his position pending investigation. William Sr. resigned as CEO. As security escorted Will out, he turned to Sarah. You planned this from the beginning, played the humble intern, gained everyone's trust. I learned from my father, Sarah replied. Start from the bottom, earn respect, show integrity. Will's face contorted with rage. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Edwards said. The FBI is waiting downstairs to discuss your financial crimes. In his office, William Sr. looked at an old photo of himself and Robert. I'm sorry, brother, he whispered. I should have listened. Sarah watched from the doorway, remembering her father's words about forgiveness and redemption. The storm had passed, but the real work of rebuilding was just beginning. The employees gathered outside, watching Will being led away by federal agents. A new era was dawning at Thompson Tech, one built on the foundation Robert Miller had always envisioned. News of the Thompson Tech scandal exploded across media channels. Headlines screamed, Tech dynasty crumbles, heir arrested for fraud, and secret heiress takes control of Thompson Tech. Sarah sat in her new office, formerly Will's, watching the chaos unfold on multiple screens. Reporters camped outside the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious Miller heiress. Miss Miller, her assistant interrupted. The employees are asking for direction. Nobody knows what to do. Call an all-staff meeting, Sarah decided. It's time they heard the truth. In the company cafeteria, hundreds of nervous employees gathered. Sarah stood before them, no longer pretending to be just an intern. "I know you're scared and confused," she began. "You've heard rumors about massive layoffs and closure. That's not happening." A collective sigh of relief filled the room. "But changes are coming," she continued. "This company lost its way. We're gonna fix that." Meanwhile, Will sat in a holding cell waiting for his bail hearing. His designer suit had been replaced with standard prison clothes. "Your father's here," a guard announced. William Sr. looked tired as he faced his son. "The lawyers think they can make a deal if you cooperate with the investigation." "Cooperate?" Will spat. "With the people who stole our company?" "Sarah didn't steal anything." "We did. We stole from our employees, our clients, even our own family." "She's not family. She's your cousin, Will. Robert was my brother." Will turned away. "Get out." Back at Thompson Tech, Mr. Edwards reviewed the damage with Sarah. "Stock prices are falling, clients are nervous, several board members resigned." "Good," Sarah replied. "We need a fresh start." Her phone buzzed, another message from a reporter. They all wanted the same story, the humble heiress who worked as an intern to expose corporate corruption. James Parker, the senior developer Will had fired, knocked on her door. "Miss Miller, the team wanted you to know, we're with you." Sarah smiled. "Please, it's still just Sarah, and thank you." The media circus intensified. Reporters dug into every detail of Robert Miller's life, the secret brotherhood with William Thompson Sr., the tragic accident that killed Sarah's parents. "They're saying your father's death wasn't an accident," Edwards warned, showing her a newspaper. "They're connecting it to the Thompson fraud." Sarah's hands trembled. "Was it connected?" "Your father was going to expose the corruption. He died the next day." Sarah felt the weight of this new revelation. "Does Will know?" "If he does, he could use it as leverage." In his cell, Will received a visitor, an old family friend with connections to the accident investigation. "Your father paid me to bury the evidence," the man whispered, "about Robert Miller's death." Will leaned forward. Finally, something he could use. Sarah spent the evening in her apartment, reviewing employee files. Many talented people had been fired or forced out under Will's leadership. She made a list of those to contact. Her phone rang. William Sr. "Will's being released on bail," he warned. "He knows about your father's accident. Be careful." Sarah hung up, remembering the night her parents died. The brake lines had failed on a straight, dry road. Her father was too careful for that to be an accident. The next morning, Thompson Tech employees arrived to find moving trucks. Maintenance workers were removing every trace of the Thompson name from the building. "We're not erasing history," Sarah announced to her staff. "We're acknowledging it. Every mistake, every betrayal, every crime, it all stays in our records as a reminder." We'll watch the news coverage from his penthouse, now under house arrest. His ankle monitor blinked as he paced. "They think this is over," he told his reflection. "They think they've won." He opened his laptop, accessing hidden files about Robert Miller's death. If he was going down, he'd take everyone with him. In the old Thompson Tech archives, Sarah found a photo of her father with William Sr., both young and smiling. On the back, in her father's handwriting, "Some truths are worth waiting for." She touched the words, understanding finally why he'd structured his revenge as a lesson rather than a punishment. The question was, would Will learn from it, or would he choose destruction? Sarah stood before the company's newly formed advisory board, presenting her vision for the future. The Thompson Tech logo had been replaced with a simpler design, Miller Technologies. "First priority, employee compensation review," she announced. "Every person fired under Will's leadership gets their job back with back pay." "That'll cost millions," a board member protested. "We can afford it. The offshore accounts have been recovered." Across town, Will watched his assets freeze one by one. His credit cards declined, his accounts emptied. Under house arrest, he could only watch his world disappear. His phone rang. His father. "The board voted," William Sr. said. "They're stripping us of all company shares." "They can't do that." "They can. The fraud charges invalidated our ownership rights." Sarah implemented changes rapidly. The old executive floor was converted into an innovation lab. Former maintenance staff were offered technical training. The company's rigid hierarchy crumbled. "You're moving too fast," Mr. Edwards cautioned. "Change takes time. Time lets fear grow," Sarah replied. "We move now." James Parker, rehired as chief technology officer, brought Sarah disturbing news. Will's been accessing old servers. He's looking for something. Sarah knew what? The accident files. In his penthouse, Will pieced together the truth. Security footage, brake inspection reports, phone records, all pointing to his father's involvement in Robert Miller's death. "Sir," his lawyer interrupted his thoughts, "the FBI wants to make a deal. If you testify against your father, get out." Sarah received the quarterly reports. Share prices were dropping. Investors were nervous about her radical changes. "Maybe we should slow down," her assistant suggested. "No, my father built this company on innovation and fairness. We're returning to those principles." She called a company-wide meeting. Hundreds gathered in the main hall. "I know you're scared," she began. "Change is hard, but look around. Every person here has value. Every idea matters. This isn't just a company, it's a community." The employees applauded. Many had stories about Will's cruelty, about opportunities denied because of background or status. William Sr. watched the meeting via security feeds. His brother's daughter was everything he'd failed to be. Honest, compassionate, visionary. He made his decision. Entering FBI headquarters, he prepared to confess. Sarah found a note on her desk that evening. "Check the old garage security tapes, October 15th, last year." The night her parents died. In the surveillance room, she watched grainy footage. Two men tampered with a car's brake lines. One looked up, William Sr. Her hands shook as she called Edwards. "He just confessed," Edwards said. "To everything, the fraud, the accident, all of it." Will's phone buzzed with news alerts. "Thompson Sr. confesses to murder of tech rival." He hurled the phone against the wall. Sarah sat in her father's old office, now hers, looking at his photo. "You knew this would happen," she whispered. "You knew the truth would come out." The next morning, employees arrived to find breakfast waiting. A note read from Sarah, "Because community starts with caring." Small changes, big impact. The culture shifted. Will watched from his window as his father was led into court. His empire was gone. His name ruined. His future uncertain. Sarah reviewed applications for the company's new education program. Former janitors training as programmers. Security guards learning system administration. "Your father would be proud," Edwards said. "He wanted this," Sarah replied. "A company where everyone has a chance to grow." The day ended with an unexpected visitor, William Sr.'s lawyer. "He left this for you," he handed Sarah an envelope, before turning himself in. Inside was a letter. "You're everything Robert hoped for. I'm sorry I failed both our families." Sarah placed the letter in her father's old desk. Tomorrow would bring more changes, more challenges. But for now, the foundation was set. A new era had begun. Sarah sat in her office reading Will's unexpected email. After 3 months of silence, his message was simple. "Can we meet?" Security advised against it. The press would have a field day. But Sarah remembered her father's teachings about second chances. "Set it up," she told Edwards, "but somewhere private." They met at a small coffee shop miles from the city. Will look different, thinner, humbler, his designer clothes replaced with simple attire. "I've been in therapy," he said immediately. "Part of my plea deal." Sarah waited. "I lost everything," Will continued. "My money, my status, my freedom. But that's not why I'm here." "Why are you here?" "I want to make things right. Not for the courts or the press, for myself." Sarah studied him carefully. "How?" "Let me work for the company. Start at the bottom. Real bottom, not pretend bottom like before. You're facing criminal charges. House arrest and probation. I testified against the other executives involved in the fraud. My lawyer says community service will help my case." Sarah considered his request. The press would crucify her. The employees would revolt. "Why should I trust you?" Will pulled out a folder. "Because of these. Documents proving other executives were involved in illegal activities. Names, dates, transactions, everything the FBI needs." "You're still trying to make deals?" "No." Will looked down. "I'm trying to fix what I helped break." Back at Miller Technologies, Sarah called an emergency meeting with her leadership team. "You can't be serious," James Parker protested. "After everything he did?" "My father believed in redemption," Sarah replied. "Will's offering valuable information." "He'll sabotage us again," another executive warned. "Not if we start him where he needs to start, at the very bottom." The next day, Will arrived at the building he once ruled. No corner office this time. His new workspace, the mailroom. You'll sort mail, make deliveries, handle basic office tasks, his supervisor explained. Minimum wage, no special treatment. Employees whispered as Will made his rounds, pushing the mail cart. Some smirked, others openly glared. During lunch, he sat alone until Sarah approached. First day's always hardest, she said, sitting across from him. They hate me. You earned that hate, now earn their respect. Weeks passed. Will worked silently, diligently. He learned names, remembered details, helped without being asked. One day, a young programmer was struggling with heavy equipment. Let me help, Will offered. I don't need help from a criminal, she snapped. Will kept his temper. You're right, I am a criminal, but right now I'm just trying to help with these boxes. She paused, then nodded. Small moments led to small changes. Will's therapist noted his progress. His probation officer reported improvement. Sarah watched from afar as her cousin slowly transformed. He's different, Edwards observed. Pain changes people, Sarah replied. Sometimes for better. One morning, Will found a note in his locker, management training program application inside. It's entry level, Sarah explained later. You'd still have years of work ahead, but it's a path forward. Why? Because you're proving my father right? People can change when given the chance. Will started crying, the first real tears he'd shed since his downfall. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything, for who I was. Sarah touched his shoulder. Don't be sorry, be better. That evening, Will wrote in his therapy journal, Day 97. Today I learned the difference between being given power and earning trust. I think I finally understand what Uncle Robert tried to teach us all along. The next morning, he arrived early, made coffee for the office, and started his rounds. One small step at a time on the long road to redemption. 1 year later, crowds gathered outside Miller Technologies for the grand opening of the Robert Miller Innovation Center. The building, once a symbol of corporate greed, had been transformed into a community education hub. Sarah stood at the podium, facing hundreds of employees, students, and reporters. My father believed success wasn't measured in dollars, she began, but in lives changed. Today proves him right. The center would provide free technology training to underprivileged youth. Former janitors, security guards, and maintenance workers who completed the company's education program now served as instructors. Will, now a junior project manager, sat in the audience. His probation had ended, but he chose to continue his gradual climb through the ranks. Next, I'd like to invite our first graduating class to the stage, Sarah announced. 50 students rose, wearing caps and gowns. Among them was Maria, the former cleaning lady who had watched Will's downfall a year ago. Now she was a certified software developer. Will took the podium next, his hands slightly shaking. A year ago, I thought I knew everything about business, he said. I was wrong. True success isn't about power over others, it's about empowering others. The audience applauded, many remembering his journey from arrogant heir to humble team member. Mr. Edwards stepped forward with a surprise announcement. William Thompson Sr. has been granted early release, he said. His testimony helped convict 12 other executives involved in corporate fraud. Sarah and Will exchanged glances. Their fathers, brothers who had taken such different paths, had finally found their way to justice and redemption. Later that day, William Sr. walked into the Innovation Center, looking older but more at peace. Robert would be proud, he told Sarah, not just of the company, but of you. Both of you. He hugged his son, their first embrace since his arrest. I'm sorry, William Sr. said, for everything I taught you wrong. I learned better, Will replied. Thanks to Sarah. The day ended with a company-wide celebration. Employees from all levels mingled freely, executives chatting with maintenance staff, developers learning from security guards. Sarah found a quiet moment in her father's old office, now converted into a student break room. A photo of Robert Miller hung on the wall, alongside his favorite quote, "Success rises from the bottom up." Will joined her, carrying 2 coffee cups. Remember when I mocked your clothes? He asked, handing her a cup. Hard to forget. Now look at us. You run the company in simple clothes, and I actually iron my own shirts. They laughed, the past's pain transformed into wisdom. A student knocked on the door. Maria's daughter, starting her first programming class. Miss Miller? Mr. Thompson? Thank you. Mom never dreamed she could be a programmer. Now I want to be one too. After she left, Sarah turned to Will. This is it, she said. This is what Dad wanted, not just a successful company, but a place where dreams grow. A place where everyone has value, Will added, understanding at last. The sun set over the city as employees and students left for home. The Miller Technology sign glowed softly, its new motto beneath, "Rising Together." Sarah locked her office, ready to leave, when Edwards brought one final document. "Your father left this," he said, "to be opened today." Inside was a letter, dated just before his death. "Dear Sarah, success isn't in winning, but in lifting others as you climb. You've proven that true. The company is yours now, but more importantly, its heart is too. Keep building, keep believing, keep rising, together. Love, Dad." Sarah shared the letter with Will, both cousins finally understanding their true inheritance. Not money or power, but the chance to make a difference. As they left the building, new students were already arriving for evening classes, eager to start their journeys. The legacy of both brothers, one lost to greed, one devoted to good, had finally found harmony in their children's choices to rise together, proving that true success comes not from what you take, but what you give back. The celebration continued well into the evening, but Sarah noticed something different in the atmosphere. The usual corporate hierarchy had dissolved, replaced by genuine connections between people from all walks of life. In one corner, a former janitor taught coding basics to an executive's daughter. Near the refreshments, Will engaged in animated conversation with the security team about their ideas for improving building access systems. "Miss Miller?" A soft voice interrupted her observations. It was Marcus, the elderly maintenance worker who had witnessed Will's worst outbursts a year ago. "I never thought I'd see the day when this place felt like home." Sarah smiled, remembering how her father would spend hours chatting with the maintenance staff, learning about their families and dreams. "That's exactly what it should be, Marcus. A home for innovation, no matter where it comes from." Later that evening, Sarah led a special tour for former employees who had been unfairly dismissed during William Sr.'s tenure. Many were returning as consultants or mentors in the new educational programs, their eyes filled with tears as they saw their old workstations transformed into learning spaces. "My father believed that talent isn't confined to Ivy League degrees," Sarah addressed the group. "It's found in the single mother working 3 jobs to support her kids. It's in the immigrant dreaming of a better life. It's in everyone who refuses to let circumstances define their potential." The tour ended in the newly established Second Chances Lab, where former convicts learned cybersecurity skills. Will had personally championed this initiative, drawing from his father's experience to create opportunities for rehabilitation. "When I was at my lowest," Will shared with the group, "Sarah didn't just offer me a second chance. She showed me how to become worthy of one." Mr. Edwards, watching from the doorway, recalled a conversation with Robert Miller years ago. "Robert knew this day would come," he said quietly to Sarah. "He saw the potential for good in both families, even when they were at odds." The evening took an unexpected turn when Maria's daughter, Lisa, rushed into the lab, laptop in hand. "I did it," she exclaimed. "I fixed the bug in the community outreach portal." The room erupted in applause as she demonstrated her solution, her first real contribution to the company's infrastructure. William Sr., who had been quietly observing throughout the day, stepped forward. "I remember when this company was just about profits," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We measured success in quarterly reports and stock prices. But looking around now," he gestured to the diverse group of people, all engaged in learning and teaching. "This is true wealth." The next morning, Sarah arrived early to find Will already in the building, helping the breakfast program team serve meals to students arriving for morning classes. He had traded his designer suits for simple business casual attire, but it was his genuine smile that marked the real transformation. "You know," he said, handing her a coffee, "I found Dad's old journal last night. There was an entry from 20 years ago, right after Uncle Robert tried to convince him to focus on education initiatives. Dad wrote that Robert was too idealistic and would never survive in real business." Sarah leaned against the counter, considering this. "And now?" "Now we're proving that idealism is good business. Our workforce training programs have cut recruitment costs by 60%. Employee retention is at an all-time high, and these students, He nodded toward the busy cafeteria. They're creating solutions we never would have imagined. The morning's highlight came when Mr. Edwards gathered everyone for a special announcement. The Miller-Thompson Foundation would be expanding its reach, opening similar innovation centers in disadvantaged communities across the country. The first would be in Will's mother's hometown, honoring her memory while creating new opportunities. This is just the beginning, Sarah declared to the assembled crowd. Every person in this room has a story of overcoming obstacles. Together, we're writing a new chapter in business, one where success is measured by the doors we open for others. As the announcement concluded, a small group of investors who had initially opposed Sarah's leadership approached her. "We were wrong," their spokesperson admitted. "Your father's vision, combined with your leadership and Will's transformation, has created something revolutionary." The day ended with a quiet moment between the cousins in the rooftop garden, another of Sarah's innovations, where employees grew vegetables for the community kitchen. The city lights twinkled below as they reflected on their journey. "I used to think legacy was about preserving what we had," Will mused. "Now I understand it's about creating something new, something better, for those who come after us." Sarah nodded, remembering her father's words about success rising from the bottom up. "Our fathers were brothers who lost their way to different extremes, but through us, their legacy found its true path." The next morning, as new students filed into the Innovation Center, Sarah posted a new sign above the entrance. "Everyone's story matters. Every dream counts. Rise together." The security camera caught Will stopping to straighten the sign, and for a moment, both cousins' gourmet faces were reflected in the glass. The past and future of two families united in a mission greater than themselves. The true legacy of the Miller-Thompson name wasn't in the buildings or the bank accounts, but in the lives they were changing, one story at a time. And in offices and classrooms throughout the building, those stories were just beginning to unfold, proving that success isn't just about rising to the top, it's about lifting others as you climb. If this story of redemption, humility, and second chances touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your perspective on life, just like Will did? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us that true success isn't measured by what we own, but by the lives we touch. Remember, sometimes the most valuable legacies aren't built in boardrooms, but in the moments when we choose kindness over power.